Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We are back with another FAQ Friday, and this one's got some very fun questions in it. Okay, so please, as ever, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to leave me any comments and questions. I love sitting down and going through all of the questions that you pose below. And of course, we'll take the best ones and use them in the next FAQ Friday. You can, of course, go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list, get a whole bunch of free goodies. And we have an academy there as well, which is full of a lot of really incredible people. So please check that out. Okay, without much further ado, let's get to our first question. Could you talk a bit about crossfading and your thoughts on the importance of how and when to best use them? Common sense tells me it's a pretty straightforward concept, but looking at your mixes and the extent that you use them, I'm thinking it's more important than most realize. You know, I have looked at a gazillion YouTube videos over the years and been in plenty of forums, and I've actually never seen a single question on crossfading before, so thank you for that. Yes, it is very, very important, incredibly important. I mean, just the sheer logic of it. If I've got a transient, I've got two transients and peaks, there's many things that I think about doing. When I've got a waveform maybe that's doing this, and I'm chopping it and having to separate it a little bit, I try to make sure that the waveforms cross each other evenly. Does that make sense? So that when one is going up and the other one's going up and down, that area crosses. So when I put a fade in there, it's super invisible. Because of a fade, no matter where you put it, it's still gonna have issues if there's, you know, two completely different sounds coming together. If there is two completely different sounds, that's when you typically use a larger, wider fade, so they blend a little bit into each other. But if you use a very short fade on two totally different sounds, you'll hear a really obvious cut point. The reality is I can describe it 57 different ways to Sunday. I mean, it really is a lot of common sense with, of course, you guessed it, listening. When I edit drums, I try my darndest to get the fade as close to the transient as possible. Therefore, if I've got a cymbal decay, here's the cymbal, it's decaying and it's about to go to this kick drum. If I've done a cut and I've moved this, you know, cymbal hit back quite a way, I'm going to wait for the last possible moment to put that fade in before the next hit of the kick drum. If I decide to fade it in the middle, it's going to go shh, shh. You're going to hear a massive drop on that decay of the cymbal. So there's some logic to it. Try to get your edits as close to the next transient as possible, obviously without pulling in some unwanted noise. That way, it's pretty unlikely you'll hear anything. The other thing I've done in extreme situations, and this is really super, super anal, next level insanity, is edited a drum kit. You know, gone through, edited a drum kit to the way I want to hear it, and then individually, not as a group, but individually put fades in. Mind-blowing. Why is that? Because the transients aren't going to be in exactly the same place. So if I put a fade on a kick drum and a snare drum, the kick drum bleed in the snare drum is going to be in a slightly different place, either, you know, depending on which mic it is, either earlier or later. So what I've done on that cut is go in and put a fade up to this transient, and on the next one, put the fade up to that transient. That is really insane detail, but it sounds like tape because you don't have a cut, which is like this arbitrary cut across the whole thing. Yes, you cut and edit in group, always edit in group. Don't get me wrong, edit in group. I'll say it one more time, edit in group. You want to edit in group, but I'm putting the crossfades in and I'm moving them to the transients. So it's like this. And it is really beautiful because then you get the full decay right up to the next transient and you put a fade in there, and it's not in an arbitrary position where maybe there's, you know, 10 milliseconds of, 10 milliseconds after the fade before the next transient. It goes up as tight as you can get it. That is super, super anal, as they like to say, but honestly, it works great. The point is like fades can be wonderful for many, many different reasons. One of the tricks, you know, I do is to take like the decay of a guitar chord, which is buzzing really badly, and take that decay and get rid of all of the high end. Take everything above 1K out. So that bzzz disappears. Okay, but then the guitar chord's going to go bzzz. So what do? I take that long decaying guitar chord that's really, really fat and warm and put a fade from the front of the decay, front of the transient, right through it. So it kind of goes, and as it fades, it goes to a big fat single harmonic, and it's really nice. It mirrors what the guitar is going to do, but instead of the buzz going bzzz, coming up in volume with all your compressors going crazy and everything, the buzz will decay with the guitar decay. So crossfade, much maligned, great question. How do you use crossfades? Do you have any little secrets? Let us know down below. What's your first approach to make a mix sound more exciting? To make it more exciting, I'd have to know the elements to answer that. But if it's a live drum kit, it's a rock band, it's a live drum kit, that's where I think parallel compression comes in. Because if I take my full drum kit, and if you've watched any of my live streaming, you'll see I do it all the time when I'm mixing in the box. Not every time, but often. Take the full drum kit, for instance, and then bus it together and create a nice, stable, slamming bus. Then take a duplicate of that bus and squash the schnizzle out of it. So instead of boom, ga, boom, boom, ga, you got all this sort of swashing around, overly compressed drums, and then just pull that up ever so slightly underneath, and you've got this boom, ga, boom, boom, and you've got this energy. And the best way I can describe doing parallel compression on drum kits is Dave Jerden, who taught me all about it in the mid-late 90s. And Dave said it's like having a coiled spring. So it's like this sort of coiled spring stuck underneath, just about to explode at any second. I think it's an amazing analogy for a parallel bus, a coiled spring, just of energy down there. So that's one way to add excitement to, of course, a drum kit. The other obvious answer, and could have been the first answer, is 3 to 5K. There you go, I've finished. No, in all seriousness, 3 to 5K, that area is, those high mids are where everything is really super sensitive. That is like where, if something is really shrill, I bet you if you reach around 2, 3, 4, 5K and pull it down out of an instrument, it can be like, oh, it's better. For instance, like baby screaming, that's that high mid. I mean, it's like, if you've ever had kids, you'll know what I mean. It's really agitates you, but it's like an emotional response. So, what do I mean by that? Well, adding that energy, that high mid energy to your mix is really going to make things exciting. Now, you just have to be very, very choosy. The last thing you want to do is just take the vocal only or a screaming guitar only and make that like 3 to 5K only, just like ridiculous. It will just stick its ugly head out of the mix. However, if you go across everything and add a little bit of extra 3 to 5K, a little bit, find some energy just to bring in, a little bit of high mids on everything. Not like the same bandwidth every time, boost, 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 but just sit there and think, well, this guitar has a little bit of edge at a 5K, and just boost a little bit of 5K on it. Maybe a little wide kind of bell, a little bit of 5K. Go to the bass and say that, that bite. Where is that? Is that 2 to 3K around there? Put a little bit of 3K on it. You see what I'm saying? Come in there and give us like a dB extra across the board on areas and find the high mids that exaggerate something that's already complementary to the instrument. Do that on everything and you'll get a more exciting mix. Do not, nada, nicht, yet nothing. Do not do this. Do not go to your master bus and just turn to 3 to 5K up. Because the problem with that is that's fine for a mastering engineer to do like little tweaks at the end. But if you really have to go in there and put like 3 dB or 3 to 5K to make your mix exciting, that's not the way to do it. I know there's a whole massive discussion about top-down mixing and set up your master. It's just not how you mix. It's not how any professionals will mix. Find it at sources. Don't go in there and cut low mids and just pull those out, because it will make your mix sound better, but a good mastering engineer might notch like half a dB here, a dB there at the most, because the mix sounds great by the time it gets to them. They're not fixing it as a 2-track. Go in there, find the instruments that would benefit from that little high mid excitement, bring that up, and your whole mix will get more exciting. And if you can't get it out of the mix, plug in an electric guitar, do some wailing line. Maybe it needs, like a high line screaming open string, kind of like a, you know, if it's over a, you know, so like, just high lines like that can be really, really good, you know. Even if they're low in the mix, a stereo kind of driving line can be an absolute godsend. So just get in there. They could just be down there going, stereo pair of those, a little bit of extra distortion on them, just so they're just edgy. Even if it's just subliminal and pushed up, that will make your mix more exciting. Maybe I'm blessed that, you know, being a musician, that I'm able to do these kind of things, but I'm just letting you know very, very, the capital V, very often when I'm mixing, I do add some stuff. Almost every mixer I've ever worked at a high level is doing additional things. Now, that can be adding little extra delays to give it energy, which create a different kind of motion. It can be like taking a hand clap and putting a tat, 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 or a tat, 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 like a little delay underneath, almost adding another kind of complexity to it. But I know many, many guys and girls who will just play a keys line or a single guitar line, and even if it's just slightly in the mix, if that's what's going to be there to add some energy, then it's great. If you watch Joe Napolitano's video on Wednesday, what did Joe say? Sometimes getting some high mids and some extra excitement in the mix is not a boost of high mids, but is a tambourine. It's a great analogy. It's really, really smart. So yes, go in there, do the parallel drum compression, get that excitement going. Go in there, find instruments that can have a little tiny bit more high mid on them that will complement the mix in general. But if you still don't have it, then maybe track something that adds some little edge and excitement to it, even if it's super low, just to get that kind of like energy. And if you want something more, plug in a tambourine or a shaker and just get some high mids up there and some high end up there. Don't be afraid to do something to make it great. Whatever you have to do to make the music amazing is what you have to do. And as long as you're not putting so much of your own personality on it, people will forgive it and will appreciate it. I have done many, many, many things where I've done overdubs very subtly, and either A, they've not been noticed, or B, they've been noticed and been like, wow, my mix sounds so much better, thank you. You know, if you're unsure of that, speak to your artist, speak to your producer, have a great working relationship with them. But the point is it's our job, if we're just mixing, to make it great. And that can involve all kinds of stuff. What is the quickest way to mix guitar and drums together? Make them sound like they're coming from the same place. That's a good question. I just mixed a song, we mixed quite a few songs today, but I mixed a song from scratch today for an artist I've been producing, and his name's Luke Underhill. And watch out for him, he's super talented, he's from Nashville, really, really cool, really great guy. And Tim Pierce did guitars, Blair did drums, John Button did bass. It was a real superstar lineup. I got to play some guitars on it as well, which was a lot of fun. And the reason why I'm thinking of this, because I'm always just in the moment that we're working on, I mixed drums and piano first, because he's a piano player. I didn't put the bass until afterwards. I did the least amount of work on the bass than I've done in ages, because I got the piano and the drums sounding super exciting, then the vocals, then added the guitars. But I've done many, many songs where it's been a guitar-driven artist, and I've done guitars and drums and vocals. So the reason why I answered it like that is the reality is, it's like, I know what you're saying. The question is, if you're identifying instruments that drive the song, obviously drums, obviously vocals. Now, is it like the piano? Or is it an acoustic guitar? Is it electric guitars? So what I do is I always, and you'll know if you've watched any of my videos, always duck out a decent amount of low mids out of my drums. I don't need a heck of a lot of 350, 400. Just don't need it. Sometimes as low as 250. I mean, the rule of thumb is around about 250, 450 in that area can get very, very clogged. I don't need a lot in that area. What is great about that? Well, pulling that out allows the low, chunky, low mids of a guitar to breathe. Also, you'll find I'll pull out some 80 and 110 and have my kick a little bit more down at 60, 50, 60. And pull out, not a lot, but pull out a dB or two of 80 and 110. That allows the bass to breathe down there. So thinking like this, I'm not going in there mathematically and pulling out like little square blocks. I've seen people do that, especially in like EDM and metal. They've literally drawn out things and dropped in sounds into it. And it can be very effective if you're trying to get a wall of limited music that just, and I don't mean limited as in like not expansive, I mean like completely undynamic, hit you over the head. EDM, metal, bang, smash you over the head. You can get a little mathematical on it. You can sit there and find places to slot in. What I'm talking about is just creating space and energy. So if I'm pulling out some low mids and some low lows, a little bit of low lows out of the drums, not a lot, but a little tiny bit, my bass is going to breathe. If I'm going to bring out a lot of low mids, my guitars are going to breathe. Now, obviously, guitars and snare drums, electric guitars and snare drums, live in similar-ish places. You know, that was the great thing about mixing on NS10s, is we liked them because when the guitars and the snare drums sounded absolutely nasty on a pair of NS10s, you were like, I got it. Because that 7 dB at 1.5K just ripped your head off. So when you had a crank guitar that was just like offensive, you knew that you had a great guitar sound. So those tend to like stick together, but the percussiveness, the aggression of a snare drum allows volume to help. It allows, like, here's your guitars. It allows this snare to just poke its head up. You can have it sitting maybe half a dB, a little bit louder than you would imagine. Just because once it goes in through the mix bus and everything, you'll find that the transients from that will just push it down and really help bring that mix together. I don't mind a little tiny bit of the snare just ever so slightly tucking its head out. And I love the effect of a little bit of bus compression, a dB just pushing that back in. If you look at my SSL when I'm mixing hybrid, you'll see that it's just catching the kick and snares like this, and I love it. It gives the mix the sound that we love. So those are my two tips. Low mids out of the drums to get the low mids and the chunkiness. And then with your snare drum, don't be afraid to be a little bit more aggressive on it. Remember that your guitars are, depending on your genre, if it's pop, rock, you're going to have the 3, 4, 5, 6K around there. If it's metal, it's usually a little heavier. It's usually 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, super, super highs up there. So, which can get in the way of your cymbals a little bit. However, after 10K, there doesn't need to be a lot. So you can let 10 and 12 like shine on your overheads on your drums. You'll get used to it. They're in similar areas, but because drums are very percussive, obviously, it's a percussive instrument, you can get away with using, you can get away with the dynamics of the drums working around the guitars. But the low mids is the biggest deal. You carve out a decent amount. I'm not talking about nothing, but a nice chunk, a 3 dB cut. In most of those drums, you're going to absolutely love the way the guitars fill it up. It works absolutely wonderfully. So please, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's get on with it. Oh, and leave me a bunch of comments and questions below for more future Fag Fridays. How do you know that something needs compression? Is there any telltale sounds that you hear, or, forgive this part, something that you see on the peaks of the waveform that makes you want to grab for one? Obviously, as you're alluding to there, you do not want to be looking at your music while making decisions. However, the visual cues are fantastic, because they allow us, when we hear something wrong, to quickly see and hear all at the same time. So if I hear like pip, 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 like super aggressive transients, like really fast transients, I'm probably going to look over and go, what is causing that super fast transient? And see like maybe a snare drum is peaking like crazy. But maybe when it was recorded, and this happens all the time, when it was recorded, the transient 1176, which is a fast compressor, but nowhere near as fast as modern digital compressors. But for its time, it was the fastest analog compressor. It may have let like 20 milliseconds of transient through, and then the guy or girl who compressed it squashed the schnizzle out of it. So what do you get? You get this peak, and then you get like a snare like this. So it gets peak, 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 peak sound. And that can be kind of fun, but it can also be pretty horrible. So what am I going to do with that? I'm going to get a compressor, probably a look ahead, not probably, definitely a look ahead compressor, something that can squash that transient down, maybe even a limiter that's a look ahead, and just take that first transient and pull it down. So that's me hearing something, probably immediately hearing it as being a snare drum. But if I didn't, and I'm just wondering where the fast transients are coming from, maybe it's a guitar. Happens with guitars as well. People send me guitars where there's a massive peak of a transient and everything else is squashed. So that's where visual cues can be kind of useful. Don't feel bad for identifying something by ear and then looking to see what it could be. That's what the visual cue's for. It's only when we look and we mix by looking, well, that's where it all falls apart. That's where we make decisions that something's out of time when it looks like it's not exactly on the grid. But when you close your eyes, you can't identify it being out of time. That's where music starts to get all rather messy. But as far as identifying compression, some of it's as easy as the most obvious thing, unbelievably dynamic vocal. Where a guy or a girl is like, I don't know why you can't think it. It's like, wow, all over the place. That's where compressors come in. Easily to identify. You're listening to your vocal and you're hearing it, they're not hearing it, hearing it, they're not hearing it, hearing it. Acoustic guitar. You heard a bit of an arpeggio, then it disappeared. Then a big chord came in, then it disappeared. Those are perfect instances for compression. But be careful. The compressor you choose is going to be a big deal. If you choose some fancy tube emulation compression and you have to do 6, 9, 10, 11, 12 dBs worth of compression between a vocal peak here and down here to try and squash that down. Because it's a tube or valve, as we like to say in England, in the UK, if you choose that valve emulation, you're probably going to find that 9, 10 dB of gain reduction is also going to introduce a lot of really nice distortion, which might be very musical and might be what you want. But if you're trying to do something that's pretty invisible and just control the dynamic range, go for something, probably even your stock compressors or your most, transparent sounding compressors. Don't go for the fancy emulations, just go for a compressor that can control it. Those are the number one reasons for using compressors. The number one are to control dynamic range. The number two reason is for the sonic capabilities. You noticed the other day I mixed a live streaming song, and when I was mixing it live, we decided to do a shootout between a bog standard Bomb Factory 1176 and AK Multimedia's 1176. Boy, could they not have sounded more different. I mean, they both look like 1176s. The Bomb Factory one that comes free with Pro Tools and has done forever as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been free forever. That one sounded great. It sounded exactly like the guitar that I put into it, but it controlled the peaks. I put the IK one on and all of the crunch of my 1176 being pushed hard came out. And it was actually quite spectacular because what the IK one did for me was brighten up the sound, give it some grit, and make it so I didn't have to do any extra work to the instrument. It already provided me with the sound I want. The Bomb Factory one was a really great compressor. Actually, for a free compressor, very much maligned. People ignore it, but many, many people I know use it every day. But it was a little darker. It was a little darker, sounded great, but it meant that I would have to put an EQ on that instrument to brighten it. So 2 plugins, the IK Multimedia was one. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you that's another reason for choosing different kinds of compressors and choosing compression, not only to control dynamic range, but also to change the sonic characteristic. Compressors color things. One of my favorite compressors, as you all know, is the MJUC. It is made by Klanghelm. The guy that makes it's super smart. It's a German product. It's absolutely amazing. And it's super cheap. I think it's still less than $30. And I'm not affiliated with this company at all, but I've turned so many people onto it. I've seen Bob Horn use it. I've seen Pensado use it. People love this plugin because it controls dynamic range. It's got a variable attack and release. It's actually got 3 different kinds of compressors built into it for $30. Best thing about it is it's got this dark hi-fi control where you can change the characteristics of it and make it darker. Or you can make it super hi-fi and a bit more modern sounding. Then, you guessed it, it's got a saturation knob. And you can sit there and distort it. And one of the things I love about it is it's not brittle when it distorts. It just folds in the highs. So it is like a really amazing compressor that's far more than a compressor. So when I decide I want to use a compressor, yes, it's definitely to control some dynamic range, but I also take into effect these two things. Do I want it to remain the same? Do I want it to sonically sound the same? Or number two, am I going to choose a compressor that deliberately changes the sound, or like the MJUC, allows me to actually like distort it and change, darken it up or brighten it up? So there's a lot of things to think about when using compression and choosing. What are you trying to do? Only limit the dynamic range, or limit the dynamic range and color the sound? Okay, the next question's pretty funny because it says, because I know it's pointed at me, there's a certain song that will go unnamed, I don't know which one it is, but it's definitely one of mine, that has a squeaky kick drum pedal that bleeds through all the drum mix. How would you remove such an annoyance? Well, I suppose my famous squeaky drum pedal that is being name-checked over here, it's a Ludwig Speed King, and it's old. It's 70s old. It's John Bonham old. And yeah, it's squeaky, and I think we have put some WD-40 on it a couple of times, and it still is squeaky. And I actually doesn't bother me. I like it. It's my drum kit when you hear that squeak, squeak. But quite frankly, if you want to remove it, then you probably just have to get some WD-40 out there and do it. Otherwise, bleeding into all the drum mics, I don't think I've ever heard it in a snare drum before, unless it was really, really loud. Maybe a little bit in the overheads. I think for me, there's probably going to be a tool that can find it. There's probably ozone. There's probably something wonderful that will get in there and pull it out. Don't get me wrong. However, I must say, and it's very important to say this, I must say that I like the wrongness. I embrace the wrongness. So a little bit of squeak, if it's in time on the kick drum pedal, is not going to bother me that much. But if it does bother you, then WD-40 at first, a new kick drum pedal, number two. Number three, find some fancy program like Ozone to pull it out. Or number four, deal with it and enjoy the fact that it's all a little wrong. But thanks for the question. So thank you ever so much for all the fantastic questions. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, sign up for the email list, get a bunch of free goodies. And above all, most importantly, leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Is there other stuff you want to talk about that's, to do with the things we've been talking about here? Please do. I'd love to know why you use compressors and what compressors you use and where you use them. So which ones do you use and where do you use them? So have a marvelous time recording and mixing, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.